just today, actually, just a few hours ago or a day ago, for some of you, they sent out the sentencing for Derrick Chauvin. And with Derrick Chauvin, he'd been sentenced to 22 years in prison, 22 and a half years more specifically. I mean, it's a good deal. It's a good amount of time, but many people did expect more. They expect a harsher punishment from this ordeal, and from catching him red-handed in the act of murder, to say the least. And some people feel insufficient, just like the Floyd family feels like the sentence is insufficient. Seen in MSNBC, they feel like they haven't had enough received for this kind of bill, and that if it was different, if they was treated differently, if it was a white man in the same situation, they think that George Floyd would be treated differently. That's one of the main issues with the debacle, that many people feel like the sentence is just, like the police department, but many people like George Floyd's family feel like this is insufficient, and many other minorities within America feel like that this is not enough, that this is not enough, that 22 years is not enough, and they felt like the maximum 40 years should have been held up to standard. The police union in Minneapolis stated that this was a monumentous justice, and really showed that police officers can be held accountable. It is true that this is the first time in U.S. history that George Floyd has caused a police officer to be arrested on the job. The first time in American history. Really sets a precedent for really the court systems in the U.S. and around the world. It's just a little bit unfortunate that the handling of the situation, the sentencing, was not as large or as long as people expected. I think there's a lot of discontent, and I think for many people, more needs to be done. This is not enough. The police union says this is an example of how this is enough justice for George Floyd and for the African American community as a whole. But overall, there needs to be more than this gist. And that's a big debate with the infrastructure bill. A few days ago, Nancy Pelosi said that she will not accept the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, if a comprehensive reconciliation bill is not passed alongside it to the Senate. Now, that kind of blocking shows to the American people that that a lot of people on the left really want reconciliation and justice, basically, and wealth distribution as a whole for the mistreatment they have for around 200 or so years, even more than that, probably around 300 years, 400 if you're counting at the far end of the spectrum. So we're going to have a YouTube video to really show and highlight kind of the anguish that people feel for not being there, for George Floyd's justice not being enough, and Derrick Chauvin not being left off the hook for most of the time. And I would say that it is a sad reality, but it's a reality that we have to accept now because it's the court ruling. The judge accepted the ruling, and that is the ruling that we have to go by. Nothing else and nothing for, but that is the ruling, and people are discontent by that.
Street from the courthouse, where we've been watching a growing crowd. Assume the word is getting there now. What's the reaction you're seeing?
Hey, Lester. Well, I should let you know this crowd is maybe on a 30-second delay from where they've been hearing, so it is just starting to spread through the crowd right now. It was quiet. People kind of taking it all in, waiting to kind of process, and I'm trying to listen for some reaction now. But the young woman we just spoke with a short time ago, Athena, you were just listening to it. So 22 and a half years, the sentence handed down to Derrick Chauvin. That is 10 years more than the recommended guidelines. You just heard what the judge had to say. What's your immediate reaction?
I'm taking this as a win for my community right now. We needed this. It could have gone just so far left that there was no coming back. He said, that he's not doing this, for the public, but he knew he really, really had to. It just had to be done this way, and I'm really thankful, so thankful for my community in the world and just showing that we can't go on like this. But I also take a second back to think about all of the other people this has happened to with the knee on the neck since George Floyd. So I'm taking it as this is a small victory right now, and I'm just so appreciative. But it's going to take me a second to process it and be like, okay, you have 22 years for him. Now let's move forward with who has continued to do this after.
Thank you very much, Athena. I really appreciate you talking to Lester. And I was just starting to speak with the Minneapolis resident right before the hearing came back. And ma'am, hi, how are you?
So, yeah, I would say that there is some sort of justice, some sort of resolution to George Floyd's kind of debacle, this kind of horrible incident with George Floyd. The murder, illegal murder of George Floyd, to be exact. But more has to be done. This is a stepping stone in the right direction. It's a stepping stone that needs to be done. And I think that this is one step forward, but we can't take 2 steps back from this ordeal. And we need to come together as a kind of, in the Western world, in that kind of space, to really examine what it is that we need to do to really homogenize communities together and really to reconciliate, to really own up to our mistakes of the past, to repression, to oppression. And one of the ways of doing that is for showing the example that the police can be held accountable, but also then reforming the police on the legal level. Getting rid of the police union is one thing, and then reforming it in a more leftist, liberal, progressive character. And then on top of that, removing collective innocence, where police officers don't have to be held accountable to some of the acts they do. And also that the police department change the culture from the top up, from the top down, of what we accept as harassment, what we accept as wrong, what we accept as infringing rights and abuse of power. And that comes from complaints. I think there's a big deal with complaints with the police, and those not being looked at. And those need to be looked up a lot more. Just saying that more has to be looked at, more has to be done, and not enough has been done to change these sorts of things. And more has to be done, and this is not the end. This is not the ending point of any of this. So this is a good thing, but I think many people are still wanting more, still wanting something to really grasp onto, to give them hope in the future that something else can really happen, something else that gives them hope, that they have a future, that they feel safe in their country, that they feel safe in America.
Yeah, they gave 22 and a half years, ma'am, is what they just gave him. So the word is trickling out here, Lester. Ma'am, what's your immediate reaction? Derrick Chauvin sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison.
Maybe that is, he set an example out of other dirty cops here. It's good that it's bad what he did, but he's not shot other black men here. They say he has no criminal charges, which is true, but the police won't, they didn't charge him for it.
Well, thank you, ma'am, very much for talking to us. I know it's kind of hard to get some information here, but so 22 and a half years. Thank you very much, ma'am. So, Lester, again, kind of a situation here where we're trying to get as much reaction as we can. And again, word is starting to trickle out. The judge said the sentence first in months, so people are trying to make the calculation here again to 22 and a half years. But, sir, the situation here, the sentence just handed down 22 and a half years. We just spoke with this gentleman from Chicago. What's your reaction?
Guilty was served. I don't think that that's enough time to send the message that needs to be sent to say that justice is trying to work for people of color. It's a dent, but we still feel empty today.
Just like I was saying, people need more. This is only a small victory in the grand scheme of things. There's only small concession to the African American community and to the minority communities within the U.S. There needs to be more, and people need to acknowledge that. This is not only just for America. This is also for really the world to really hear, especially the Western world to really hear, and really to reform and look at and process racial profiling in the police and institutional racism in the government system. It's a big problem around the world. It's a big problem even in non-Western nations as well. And that needs to be looked at. And with the U.S. being the beacon of example for most of the world, the U.S. has to follow suit, follow with kind of their guiding principles of freedom and democracy and liberty, and really pursue equality for everybody. But we know that that's not going to happen anytime soon with the Senate at 50-50 split with a slim Democratic majority. That's when we have to wait until the 2022 midterms, where then Democrats have to vote out the Republicans, vote out those senators, and to retain the House and to actually grow a majority in the House, really to get things passed. Because now we're at a standstill, that nothing can get passed. We can't get past a Voting Rights Act, a new Voting Rights Act, the Freedom Rights Act, to get Americans together, to enfranchise Americans and not to suppress them, and to limit state governments that are mostly ruled by Republicans in many states, many swing states, from exploiting electoral laws and really returning to a point where they are disenfranchising a large majority of the minority population, and especially the lower class and the working class. We need to get to a point where we can push forward. Even though a lot of liberals will state that this is a great majority victory, this is great, and the national media will overblow this. The mainstream media will overblow this success and this victory. But we need to look past that. We need to look past that, and we need to move forward with actual meaningful reform. If we don't do this, and if we don't get these things passed, really we return to ground zero of why these things happen and why there's a lot of discontent among many minority groups across the world, across the Western world especially, of people of color, APII, African Americans, Latinos. They want change, and they want now. And for the younger generation especially, you see this with the lower turnout of younger people in elections because they feel like they are not heard. They're not represented that well. And this is a momentous point that actual change can occur. And I agree with this man in saying that it's a solemn moment because even though justice was served, still George Floyd died, and many after his death still endured the same fate. And many of them don't have the kind of media scrutiny that George Floyd did. So they won't receive the same justice that George Floyd did. And that needs to change.
we feel empty because it still feels like twisted justice in which we're all so accustomed to, you know. But we did get a guilty, and then we did get time. But we just feel void today. You know, it still feels void.
Thank you very much, sir. So, Lester, again, some conflicting feelings here. Some folks, you may be able to hear somebody behind me. There's a bit of anger here that they wanted more. Certainly, many people in this community, they had wanted the maximum, up to 40 years. Legal experts, of course, said that wasn't likely. Prosecutors asked for 30 years. So, again, 22 and a half years for Derrick Chauvin on that second-degree murder charge. A mixed reaction so far. Some people saying it was enough, so they wanted more than 20 at least. Others, as you can hear in the distance, perhaps there is some anger. They wanted more, Lester. So we're continuing to to get reaction here as this crowd continues to grow. But for now, I'm going to send it back to you, Lester.
All right, Gabe, thanks very much. 22.
So that is the Derrick Chauvin kind of verdict. 22 and a half years, 10 years more than the 15. A little bit more than the 15 kind of year kind of regulation for those kinds of crimes. But people feel discontent because, first of all, the sentencing is quite short. There could be a maximum of 40 years. And this could really have set a precedent of a beacon example of what you're not supposed to do as a police officer, and then ever more. And also, nothing in the Senate or in the House, no legislation that is supposed to help this, like the January 6th Commission as well, has been really passed. It's all been stalled within the Senate. It's passed the House, but it's been stalled in the Senate. And because it doesn't pass the filibuster of 60 senators in the House of 100, which is a big flaw within the American system. And that needs to change. But many people like Manchin and Kristen Sinema in the Democratic Party, as well as the majority or all of the Republican Party in the Senate, do not want to change. They do not want to change. They do not want to change the filibuster because they know they are a minority and that the filibuster protects them and protects right-wing views, unpopular views with the American people, even though in the 2020 elections and Senate elections, there were 3 million more Democrats that actually voted in favor of Democratic candidates over Republican candidates, but they still hold a large sway within the American political system, which I think is wrong.